declare a recess at any time without objection, so ordered. I want to welcome everyone to this hearing of the Military Personnel Subcommittee. Today's hearing is focused on recruiting shortfalls and growing mistrust, perceptions of the U.S. military. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. I hope this hearing provides an opportunity for the members to have a productive exchange with our witnesses and provide answers to their questions. By all metrics, the all-volunteer force has been a success. It is the most highly trained, proficient military force in the world. But at 50, the all-volunteer force is at a crossroads. In 2023, all military services except the Marine Corps and Space Force missed their recruiting goals. Although none of the three largest services, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, are healthy, recruiting shortfalls are particularly troubling in the U.S. Army. Last year, the Army wanted to recruit 65,000 active duty troops, but ended up falling 15,000 troops short. To stave off worse losses, the Air Force and the Navy offered extensive financial bonuses and took a wide range of other one-time measures. The Navy increased the maximum enlistment age from 39 to 41 and the Air Force to age 42. The recruiting crisis has multiple underlying causes, not least of which is the proliferation of bad news stories about military life. What parent or teacher would recommend military service to their son or daughter when the overwhelming perception is that there are rats in the barracks, suicide rates are climbing, opioids are everywhere, the food options are terrible or inaccessible, and there's a risk that your child could be raped or murdered? And there's the administration's pet project forcing the military to be the guinea pig for their next social justice experiment. Even now, when we see that the DEI has failed across the country, increasing division and hate, ignoring merit, and now fostering rampant anti-Semitism, this administration still elevates social justice over our national security. And the result is a steep loss in institutional trust in the services and recruiting numbers at their lowest point in 50 years. There is one service that hasn't tried to bend to the culture wars. The Marine Corps stayed on message and has met their recruiting goals year after year. The Marines' success, where every other service has failed, is an indictment of this administration's failed social justice experiments. From today's panel, I want to hear how DoD and the military services will provide a consistent message that emphasizes service and commitment and doesn't cater to woke theories. I want to understand how each service plans to update their recruiting strategy to address Gen Z expectations, to familiarize a distant public with the military service, and to improve service members' quality of life. Let me introduce our witnesses, the Honorable Ashish Vasrani, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, the Honorable Agnes Schaefer, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, the Honorable Franklin Parker, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and the Honorable Alex Wagner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Welcome, but before we hear from our witnesses, let me offer Ranking Member Kim an opportunity to make any opening remarks. Ranking Member Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I absolutely agree. Look, our military is facing its greatest recruiting shortfall since the inception of our all-volunteer force over 50 years ago. So I'm glad we're holding a hearing on this very important topic. There is no doubt that the dwindling connection between our nation's younger generations and knowing family or friends who have served in the military are influencing their willingness to put on America's uniform. So I'm interested in hearing from our witnesses how they are engaging with Gen Z, as well as on how they are being innovative in recruiting practices to convey the value of service both in the military and throughout civil service. Also, whether it's re-examining the medical standards or ensuring the right bonus structures are in place, I want to know how the services are measuring the effectiveness of these efforts in ensuring we are able to recruit the best and the brightest. We know there is a challenge. We know this is a challenge money alone cannot solve. So today, I would like to hear how you're thinking out of the box to attract a generation of people who don't know of a world without iPhones or the internet. Regardless of what's in the news, I believe all of us in this room want the same thing. We want the strongest possible military to defend our nation. And we should work together to foster a culture that encourages and rewards excellence, creativity, innovation, and critical thinking so our military can continue to meet emerging challenges around the globe. I, for one, value the importance of public service, be it in active duty or through civil service. The brave men and women of our armed services are an inspiration, and I know we need to support them and military leadership to invest in our people and fully recognize who it is that keeps us safe. Thank you to the witnesses again for being here, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member. Each witness will have the opportunity to present his or her testimony, and each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize their testimony in 5 minutes or less. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. With that, Mr. Vazrani, you may make your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this morning along with my colleagues to discuss the department's efforts in this challenging recruiting environment and the need for a whole-of-government approach to increase the propensity of young Americans to pursue service to the nation, particularly through the military. The nation's armed forces, staffed by military professionals who choose to enlist or commission, is the greatest fighting force the world has known and is the bedrock of our national security. We are here today because the all-volunteer force faces one of its greatest challenges since inception. In fiscal year 2023, the military services collectively missed recruiting goals by approximately 41,000 recruits, and that number understates the challenge before us as the services lowered end strength goals in recent years, in part because of the difficult recruiting environment. The causes of the recruiting challenges we face are complex and multifaceted. Some contributing factors are shifts in the nation's economy and population. Others are unique to the military. Military recruiting is more difficult when the economy is strong because young adults have many more options. We are also recruiting from a smaller eligible population. 77% of today's youth would not qualify for military service without some form of a waiver. In addition, more broadly, members of Generation Z have low trust in institutions and are decreasingly following traditional life and career paths. The military is not alone in navigating these challenges. Other national service programs, for example, AmeriCorps and Peace Corps, have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. College enrollment has also declined. According to a recent Wall Street Journal NORC poll, 56% of adults said four-year college was not worth the cost. From a uniquely military consideration, the creation of the all-volunteer force 50 years ago set in motion a decades-long shift in who serves in our armed forces. For example, in 1995, 40% of young people had a parent who served in the military. By 2022, that number was down to 12%. This has led to a disconnect between the military and a large share of society. About 20 years ago, just over a quarter of youth had never thought about serving in the military. In recent years, more than half of youth have never thought about serving in the military. Youth of today are not saying no to what the military has to offer. They simply don't know much about military service. While the picture of the current recruiting environment is acutely difficult, the department and the military services are working together to resolve issues, improve processes, and expand awareness of the many opportunities military service offers. With the support of and authorities provided by this subcommittee, the U.S. military offers an unparalleled value proposition for military service. We provide our members with competitive pay and benefits, prepare them for career success in the military and beyond, and offer a meaningful and motivating mission. Our messaging must convey that value proposition of military service beyond the tangible benefits that aligns with the career values of young people in the labor market. We must reach today's youth where they are with a message that resonates with them and motivates them to act. Our marketing campaigns are more complex than in the past. We are constantly refining to adapt to the ever-changing digital landscape across different media and social media platforms. Beyond that, we need the help of leaders across the nation, including members of Congress, to make a national call to service, especially for military service, but also for national and public service. We need leaders to talk about military service with their youth in their communities and ask them to learn about and consider serving in the military. Overcoming our recruiting challenges requires a national response with contributions from across government and the private sector. Over the last 50 years, the all-volunteer force has proven itself to be the best way to maintain a force capable of defending our nation, and with our combined efforts, I am confident we will remain as such for the foreseeable future. In closing, I want to thank you and the members of this subcommittee for providing the opportunity to address this critical issue. I would also like to thank you for your continued advocacy on behalf of the women and men of the Department of Defense and their families. I look forward to your questions and working with the subcommittee to advance our shared goals.
Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of the men and women of the United States Army. I look forward to our discussion today regarding the multifaceted root causes of our recruiting challenges, as well as the data-driven plan that the Army is implementing to address those root causes and to transform our recruiting enterprise. While the efforts of the Army's great recruiting workforce and the initiatives put in place over the last 18 months, such as the Future Soldier Prep Course and the Be All You Can Be campaign, have ensured that our FY23 recruiting numbers were better than our FY25 numbers, there is still work to be done. In the early summer of 2023, the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army established a team to conduct a 90-day study to identify ways to transform and modernize the Army's recruiting enterprise. The study looked at 25 years' worth of recruiting data, identified external and internal root causes of the recruiting crisis, examined the recruiting structure and performance of our sister services, as well as best practices from the private sector, and developed recommendations for how the Army could transform its recruiting enterprise to better position itself as an employer of choice. The study team identified the following external causes of our current recruiting challenge, many of which factor into propensity to serve. Declining familiarity with military service, declining eligibility, lower propensity to serve in the military, declining trust in institutions, a strong civilian labor market, participation rates that are dropping, higher numbers of youth are enrolling in college right out of high school, which is shrinking our traditional high school prospect market. And COVID-19 caused lower productivity for our recruiters due to loss of access to schools, and also caused learning loss for students, which decreased eligibility. The study team also identified the following internal causes of the recruiting challenge. The focus and practices of Army recruiters have not adjusted to fundamental shifts in the U.S. labor market and the talent needs of the Army. Currently, Army recruiters are not selected, incentivized, managed, developed, or employed in alignment with proven workforce management practices. The Army has historically prioritized meeting current year production targets at the expense of adopting to fundamental trends in the labor market. This has inhibited the development of new markets, methods, and technology to compete for talent. The Army has historically not incorporated data collection and program evaluation design into recruiting policy planning and implementation. And the Army's recruiting enterprise contains multiple levels of hierarchy and lacks a single point of accountability for marketing and recruiting. Based on the study's findings and recommendations, in October 2023, the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army announced their decision to transform the Army recruiting enterprise in 5 key ways. First, the Army will expand the prospect market that it focuses on and adjust the methods used to engage with prospects. Second, the Army will transform how it selects, trains, and manages recruiters by beginning a multi-year transformation. Third, the Army will create an experimentation capability within our Army Recruiting Command to drive innovation, generate evidence-based insights, and scale successfully innovations across the command. Fourth, the Army will establish an evidence-based learning capability in the headquarters that will incorporate more data collection and program evaluation design into a session's policy and planning and implementation. And lastly, marketing functions and the entire recruiting enterprise will be consolidated and realigned as a proposed 3-star command that reports directly to the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you and share with you how the Army is leaning forward to change its recruiting enterprise. I look forward to our discussion and your questions.
Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I appreciate this opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the Department of the Navy to discuss recruiting shortfalls and perceptions of the U.S. military. Today, we are facing our generation's biggest challenge to recruit sailors and Marines. COVID protocols and closures kept our recruiters out of schools for the better part of 2 years, denying our access to the most productive recruiting venue. Now, low unemployment, a historically competitive labor market, and a shrinking pool of eligible candidates makes recruiting even more difficult. Data shows young people are increasingly unfamiliar with military service and do not recognize it as a building block to a future career or as a potential career in itself. We must reverse this trend. We must better communicate the value of military service, how we empower our members to become the most successful versions of themselves, and how we imbue them with technical, professional, and leadership skills that will benefit them throughout their lives and their careers. Today's youth seek careers with purpose and opportunity, a work environment that is comfortable and respectful, and benefits such as work-life balance, job security, and high income. Much of today's eligible population is focused on building a career foundation early, obtaining higher education, gaining job experience, and becoming financially stable. These aspirations align well with military service. In addition to the intangible benefits of military service, a feeling of patriotism, a sense of duty, honor, selfless service, camaraderie, purpose, and character development, military service offers many more tangible benefits: stable employment in any economy, compensation higher than 90% of civilian peers of similar age and education, competitive benefits packages, a portable retirement program, housing, full medical coverage, access to quality, affordable childcare, morale, welfare, and recreation programs, fuller part-time opportunities, extensive travel opportunities, education benefits both during and after service, loan repayment programs, college credit for completed training, transferable skill sets, and leadership experience. The Department of the Navy already offers generous education benefits via the 9/11 GI Bill, tuition assistance, and loan repayment programs. Recently, we also established the United States Naval Community College to bring accessible naval-focused education to Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard enlisted personnel, enabling our enlisted service members to earn associate degrees and stackable professional certificates and enhancing the resources available to them. We find the greatest deterrents to military service revolve around concerns about deployment, service commitment, and perceived negative impacts on physical and mental health. Many of these concerns reflect the inherent characteristics of military service, and maritime service in particular. We ask our sailors and Marines to carry out difficult, stressful, and potentially dangerous missions and deploy with their units and commands around the world to do what their nation needs, when and where it is needed. To ease this burden, we endeavor to provide geographic stability, limit permanent change of station moves, and offer dual military co-location to the maximum extent feasible, while incentivizing and rewarding those who take on our most challenging assignments. However, None of these efforts matter in a recruiting context if we do not effectively tell our story and communicate the value of the benefits of military service and our unwavering commitment to our people. We face a significant challenge, but we are tackling it head-on as we do with any mission. I remain inspired by the exceptional and exhaustive work of our Navy and Marine Corps recruiters, but they cannot do it alone. We need your support, both in Congress and in your districts, to communicate the value of military service as an unmatched opportunity for life skills, leadership development, and a well-earned sense of pride and accomplishment that positions our members for successful lives, both professionally and personally. On behalf of Secretary Del Toro and the senior leadership of the Department of the Navy, the United States Navy, and the United States Marine Corps, thank you for helping us address these challenges. I look forward to working with you to meaningfully support our service members and their families, to communicate the value of military service, and to foster an environment where young Americans can see a future for themselves through service. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, distinguished members and staff of the subcommittee, I'm proud to testify today about the Department of the Air Force's efforts to inspire and attract talent from across the United States in order to remain the most lethal, effective, and collaborative force possible, one that deters our adversaries and inspires the confidence of the American people. Today's youth must view us as an employer of choice, as well as recognize that service in the Air and Space Forces offers a rare value proposition. It provides opportunity, it provides community, and it provides a sense of purpose. After 22 years of war, with that sacrifice borne largely by those who fought and their families, the vast majority of today's youth are unfamiliar with the military. As Mr. Vazirani noted, 30 years ago when I was in high school, 40% of youth had a parent that served, but today that number is under 13%, along with the lack of awareness of the benefits and opportunities of military life. This, combined with historically low unemployment, a strong private sector wage growth, concerns about the risks of military service, COVID's impact on school access, all has turned into a perfect storm, creating the most challenging recruiting environment for our high-tech service since the height of the dot-com boom, nearly a quarter of a century ago. We consider fiscal year 22 our first post-COVID recruiting year. And although both the Air and Space Forces met their active duty enlisted recruiting goals, the Air Force did so by borrowing into our delayed entry program, known as our DEP. As a result, we recognized that we'd be relying on a lower DEP to start fiscal year 23, and so we took decisive action. In January, we convened a cross-functional team to look under the hood and understand where our policies could be brought into better alignment with either updated DoD accession standards or the successful policies of our sister services. With a North Star principle of maintaining top quality talent, we sought to ensure we were in sync with our rapidly changing population. Examples include aligning our body composition standard with the DoD standard, allowing in recruits with small hand and neck tattoos for the first time, and taking a fresh look at our forever ban that kept recruits who tested positive for THC from reapplying. After evaluating the Army's experience with THC retesting, the DAF authorized a 2-year pilot program and paired it with heightened academic requirements. In sum, these and other efforts resulted in approximately 2,900 new enlisted accessions in FY23. That's 2,900 high-quality individuals with a propensity to serve that would have otherwise been excluded. Let me state unequivocally that the DAF has not changed our high standards nor compromised the caliber of our applicants. What we have done is simply expand the opportunity for qualified individuals to join our ranks. These efforts allowed us to begin fiscal year 24 with an active duty Air Force DEP that exceeded our goal, the strongest of any service. Paired with filling 100% of our weekly basic training slots, I can say that we are cautiously optimistic that we will achieve our active duty Air Force and Space Force enlisted accession goals in FY24. But to continue that momentum now and into the future, we're going to need your help. As trusted leaders in your communities, we ask that you ramp up your efforts to engage your constituents and advocate for the opportunities that military service provides, the community that awaits, and the sense of purpose that lasts a lifetime. A stronger partnership will go a long way to shift the narratives away from the perceived risks of military service, supercharging our recruiting efforts, and grow young Americans' interest in the military. With your support, we will continue to build a team of teams, taking advantage of the dynamic fabric of our nation and transforming our young women and men into airmen and guardians who exemplify and defend the ideals and freedoms upon which our country was founded. With that, I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you to all of you for your opening testimony. I yield myself 5 minutes to begin questions. In February, the Associated Press obtained a summary of the Army's Pulse survey, which ranked the top barriers to recruitment based on public polling. Representative Waltz and I asked the Army to send us the underlying data, and we never got it. The Army said that they'd hired an outside polling firm with confidential methods, so instead of the actual poll, they sent us a vague summary. Dr. Schaefer, what's the point of paying for a poll about recruiting if you can't share the data with the policymakers who are trying to actually fix the recruitment crisis?
I'll look into that. I wasn't aware that you didn't receive it.
Okay, we appreciate you looking into that, and as I said, we've asked for it, we never got it. Dr. Schaefer, I don't think the Army's survey was actually meant to fix recruiting, though. I think it was a PR stunt. Congress got the survey summary after the Associated Press reported about it. And here's the Associated Press's headline, quote, "Army sees safety, not wokeness, as top recruiting obstacle." So it really feels like this is a PR move, not a move in good faith working with the Committee of Jurisdiction and Oversight that is tasked with helping you address this major issue of the day. So I wasn't surprised to find the actual polling data recently that actually tells a very different story from the polling data that you guys released and worked with the AP to publish. And to be transparent, I'm going to enter the findings and the crosstabs from a nationwide poll of military veterans by the American Principles Project into the congressional record so that you and anyone else in the public can actually access these results. This poll, which we can all read, found that 73% of veterans believe that the U.S. military has become too political regarding race, gender, and sexuality. Even worse, a quarter of the veterans would tell a young person not to enlist. And when those veterans were asked to explain why, in their own words, the most common reason was politics. So why do you think those results are so different between the Army Pulse survey and another publicly available survey? Why would it tell a different story?
I'm not familiar with the survey that you're referring to. It may be sort of sample size questions. I'm just not sure. But I will say that we're looking across these surveys, and I'm worried about all of those barriers that they cite. And so I don't think we should, again, this is a multifaceted issue, and I think we need to have a multifaceted solution that addresses those concerns or misperceptions that people have. So I welcome any additional.
So this really recent survey says that clearly politics, DEI, wokeness is a problem. What's the Army doing to change that perception about politics being a recruitment barrier?
Well, I think all of us, you know, in the military, all of us share this responsibility to be apolitical.
What's the Army doing about it?
So I think, I mean, we are demonstrating that we are being apolitical. I think
How?
our policies are really centered around our service members, maintaining readiness, first and foremost, quality of life issues, and trying to really get the message out about again, the value of service.
So you're telling us that you're trying to express that the Army is apolitical, but how are you doing it? How are you doing that differently? How are you doing that to address the issue that so many people are claiming is a real reason that people aren't joining the Army? Because
So I'm not sure why there is an underlying perception that we are political. I don't know what that is, and I think we need to dig into that more.
Interesting. Dr. Schaefer, 4 out of 5 recruits come from military families. And these veterans are saying the military is too left-wing and political, and they're telling their relatives not to enlist because of it. I mean, would you disagree that wokeness is a top recruiting obstacle for the Army?
If people have that perception, I think that we need to address it.
I
Again, the data that we have seen indicates that it's not one of the top concerns. The top concerns remain concern about injury.
But you just said you agree that
lethality.
if it is a perception, we have to address it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there are issues out there that people are concerned about, this gets at the sort of disconnection between the country and the military right now, which I am extremely concerned about. I talked about this at my confirmation 2 years ago, confirmation hearing. We need to find ways to reestablish those ties to the country. And if people have concerns, I think that we need to address them.
Okay, I ask for unanimous consent to include into the record the on-message survey to make it publicly available, and without objection, so ordered. I yield to Ranking Member Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, look, I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, about the need for data, and I hope to be able to work with you all in terms of being able to get that and try to make sure we're being thoughtful and pragmatic. But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chair, just dropping a survey that we've never seen before into a public hearing, and give us an opportunity to really think this through and figure out what kind of message and what kind of information we're providing to the American people and making sure that it is rigorous and credible. So I just hope that going forward we can try to do that together, and I'm willing to work with you and work hopefully with the DoD to make sure we have that kind of information that we know we can go off of and make real determinations on, rather than just trying to drop things at the last second here. Going forward, look, Assistant Secretary Schaefer, I appreciate your testimony. You talked through 5 points. You said that you're trying to change going forward. And that's something I wanted to dig at a little bit more, because, look, we're seeing the challenges across all sectors of the workforce right now in the country, all industries right now, about recruitment and being able to bring people in. So I guess I wanted to ask you, in terms of those, what are you learning? What specifically are you drawing from in terms of best practices, whether they are from other government agencies, but also from the private sector, and in order to understand how we're going to be able to take on new innovative practices when it comes to recruitment? I appreciated some of the details you provided, but I want to just know, what specifically can you layer on top of that to give us an understanding of best practices here?
Thank you for that question. So we did look at best practices from industry. We met with large companies, small companies, to get a sense of how they are recruiting and how they are connecting with Gen Z. And I think we have done a lot of work on kind of the expectations that Gen Z has. And so clearly they are looking for purpose in their careers. That's what we keep hearing, and we have that in spades. They're looking for flexible career paths, which would cause us to sort of shift away from our hierarchical, siloed career paths that we currently have, to more of a jungle gym model, which is what they're looking for. So we are trying to infuse some more of that flexibility. They talk about the importance. Gen Z is very interested in the relationship with their recruiters. That's very important to them. So we are making a shift towards a professionalized recruiting force, which is an industry standard. Right now, we are working off of a borrowed manpower model in which we pull people from different specialties to become recruiters. we're looking actually at the other services as well, and one of the things that makes the Marine Corps so effective in recruiting is that recruiting is a path to leadership in the Marine Corps. You have to be a recruiter in order to become the commandant or the ACMAC.
Yeah.
And so that's how you bring in your best and brightest. And so we are working on revamping the career paths for recruiters as well.
Thank you. Assistant Secretary Parker and Wagner, I want to ask you, a lot of it we're talking about bringing in new people into the fold, but what we know is that a lot of people who join the services have family members or from military families. So I guess I want to just ask you, what specifically are you all doing in terms of that kind of outreach and communication to military families to try to address some of these concerns that they may or may not have? So we'll start with Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Ranking Member Kim. We are definitely trying to reach out to families and to influencers being teachers and coaches.
But is there a
people in their
particular
lives.
cohort, a particular section of the recruitment element that is specifically for military families?
That's an area that we're definitely trying to reach into, both through digital media and also with increasing access to schools as well, which helps us get access to those influencers also. And so we're trying to reach out in every way that we can. We recruit in every zip code, and so that allows us to provide recruiters.
So,
all
but
across the
just to
nation.
my point, like, is there a specific team? There's a specific component of recruiters that are specific to military families?
You know, I'm not aware of a specific team of recruiters that are focused on military families, but I know it is an effort that we're trying to reach into to make sure we're helping to inform military families and also those other influencers.
Yeah, look, let's follow back up. I know I'm out of time, but I'll follow back up with each of you because I think that's really critical in terms of how we engage. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Mr. Gates.
Secretary Wagner, I want to start by commending you on the waivers that have allowed 2,900 Americans to express their patriotic service in the military and not allowing one instance of THC use or one positive test result to forever impair that service. It's something I've worked on in a bipartisan way with members of this committee, and frankly, I don't even know that it should necessitate a waiver. I hope that the good results you're getting from those airmen will allow us to make even more progress on that front.
Thank you, Congressman. We didn't do this in a vacuum. The Army commissioned a RAND study to make sure the quality of those who they assessed as a result of their waiver process was still high. We put on additional restrictions during our pilot program. The Navy is also using a similar OSD authority in order to waive.
Yeah, I get the sense that these aren't, that it's not being implemented exactly the same way in every service branch. I don't know if that should concern us. Maybe best practices will emerge, but I do want to move on.
2 years, we'll have really solid data, and we'll definitely come back to you in this committee.
I look forward to it. So there's this September 5th, 2023 piece in Air and Space Force magazine, and it's titled in part, "Why Diversity Should Scare the Hell Out of Our Adversaries." And I've never seen the fear in someone's eye when they're confronted with diversity, but you're quoted in that piece saying that you don't think the military is political. And we just heard Chairman Banks go over this feeling in the veteran community, which is such a critical referral source, that the military is political. So I'll give you the opportunity to address the question that was asked to Ms. Schaefer.
Right. So, Congressman, members of the committee, come to work every day. Partisan politics never figures into any.
Okay, never's a strong word. Go ahead and put up the text from Minot Air Force Base. I'm sure you're familiar with this. In Minot Air Force Base, this message goes out, and service members are told that if they go to a Turning Point conference, that that could jeopardize their continued service in the U.S. military. Doesn't strike me that it's never political, because that seems like a blatantly political threat against people's service.
Congressman, so the good news is this was looked into. And as I understand the facts, and I believe a letter was delivered to you yesterday from the commander of Air Force Global Strike Command. First, this was based on incorrect information from a master sergeant that sent a text in unofficial channels to his peer group. The text was then forwarded to the medical squadron. Within an hour of that text being forwarded, the squadron commander first corrected it, second noted it was a local political fundraiser, Third, clarified that there
What's
were
a
no
conference?
issues
Hold
with
on.
member
I've been to these.
participation.
They're not really fundraisers. They're conferences for people who want to come together and share their views on politics.
I believe the
Right.
the Patriot rally was a fundraiser. There was a
But
speaker
this is
from
the
Turning Point who was at the
action
Patriot
event.
rally.
I mean, you're not saying that service members impair their opportunity to be in the Air Force by going to a Turning Point action event, right?
Absolutely not. And in
Right.
fact,
So
this was
your
the
argument
Patriot
is that
Front rally,
this was
which had a speaker from
a master
Turning
sergeant
Point,
who put out this text message improperly, right?
based on incorrect information.
Right. That was then corrected.
Immediately by squadron leadership.
That is a success story, except in so much as it creates this theory or that people might not get formally reprimanded under some formal rule, but that there's a cultural shift right now in the military that would even have someone think they could send a threat like this out. I mean, so don't you think, I mean, because when you say it's never political, that seems to run afoul of this. There are times when this politics emerges and we kind of got to play whack-a-mole to ensure that we have an apolitical fighting force. But, I mean, doesn't that concern you?
The way I read the text, Congressman, it appears that the security forces master sergeant was acting on incorrect information, didn't thoroughly
How does that
vet it.
happen? How does someone end up acting on that incorrect information and then disseminating a message like this?
Well, as I understand, it was an informal text sent to members of his peer group.
Are you familiar
Not
with
through
the
official
matter of Oscar Rodriguez, who goes to a retirement ceremony? He wants to reflect on God and faith in that retirement ceremony with the U.S. Air Force, and then is removed forcibly from the ceremony for making mention of God. Is that something case you're familiar with?
Congressman, I'm sorry, this is the first time.
Okay, great. Well, I seek unanimous consent to enter this Breitbart reporting into the record on the matter, Mr. Chairman. And again, you know, just another example where I know we got to play whack-a-mole, but when people feel as though attending a Turning Point event or referencing God might bring some punishment on them, that can impact some of the recruiting we're talking about. Without objection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about this subject. I think for the third time this committee has spent time on this issue of recruitment, but really the conversation is about the politicization of the military. When I served in the military, I was a registered independent because I had been raised by my father and my grandfather to not express or articulate my political views in any ways while serving in active duty. And the thing that I'm struggling with right now is the fact that we've been given this piece of survey with unknown provenance and with 50-plus questions to be able to process without any advance notice. I had the opportunity to read a few of these questions, and I would question the interpretation of said questions. An example would be question number 14. In your own words, why wouldn't you encourage a young person to join the military? Only 3.8% of the responses were wokeism. The chairman indicated that there was an indication that that was somehow connected with politics or political climate. That was a separate response, and that response was indeed 16.7%. That doesn't reflect anything about a person's political affiliations, whether maybe they're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent. I can tell you that while I served active duty, I felt as though the military, my peers, were too political as well. So I would have responded in that way to this question. Another question was question 15. Please tell me if you agree or disagree with the following statement. Recently, the U.S. military has become too political with regard to things like racial equity and gay and trans issues. I also would have responded to this as a Democrat. Yes, it was too political, because leaders like these are standing in places like these and politicizing our military, rather than really thinking about the service and the requirements, the quality of life of people who are raising their hand to protect and defend. Another question, question 9 says, in your opinion, what is the single most important issue facing the military today? The single most important issue, if you summarize, is leadership and recruitment and retention. That would comprise about 28% of the responses. If I look for those things that this panel on the right side is looking for, 1.7% said Joe Biden, 0.3% said Democrats, 0.3% said liberal issues, 0.3% said requiring vaccination. So if we're really going to hone in on these 50-plus questions of information, we need to be thoughtful in the way that we interpret the data. As somebody who not only served in the military, but is also an engineer and a STEM professional, it really matters what questions we ask. It really matters how we interpret those questions. And I'm kind of sickened by the fact that we're now at the third time having this conversation about recruiting. And rather than actually listening to the genuine experts here who are saying it's complicated, because indeed it is complicated, we are still marching out these kinds of Breitbart, the provenance unknown questionnaires. I am enormously frustrated that this committee has not spent its time really thinking about the quality of life issues that our men and women and those who are thinking about being part of the service are facing. And I have no questions. I'm just going to yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's kids are glued to their phones. They receive their news from social media apps, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, et cetera. If these apps use algorithms that send these kids down rabbit holes, showing nonstop videos of, let's say, mold-infested barracks and other failures of our military, I'm going to ask you to take this for the record. What steps are each of the services taking to basically combat the issue of the, let's just say, misinformation? For whatever reason it's some of the younger generation think it's entertaining. This is the entertained generation, and we can't expect anything different. But I'd like to know what steps you are using, if any, and the answer might be no, to combat the negative press, if you will, the negative influence that the young, age-eligible military, potential military accessions might be consuming. Now, during the senior enlisted perspective hearing on March the 9th, we discussed the lack of propensity to serve. I mean, there's enough data out there that says, okay, there's a lower number of young people being, and influencers who say you should, at least spend a little bit of time in the military. At that hearing, I had asked each service to take for the record if their recruiters are being welcomed by the schools. And we're largely talking high schools here, not colleges, high schools. By the Board of Education, the teachers, the counselors, the coaches, et cetera. Assistant Secretary Parker, the response I received from Department of the Navy was some high schools only allow access once a year. Again, how many high schools in the Navy's recruiting locations are restricting access? And we're going to take this across. Again, take it for the record, because I'm guessing you don't have those numbers at your fingertips. How many high schools in the Navy's recruiting locations, or however they're spread out, because your recruiters travel, are restricting access? And what can we do to ensure that you and every service have as much access as possible? This, when you look at the total number of accessions, officer and enlisted, is it a fair statement to say that if you got 100% of the numbers you're trying to recruit, the majority of those are enlisted? Is that a true statement? You don't have to say it, just a head nod will be fine. So when you think about that, we can, or you can, develop the tactics, techniques, and procedures, as we would say, to focus on that. And I'm guessing you're probably talking anywhere after the age of 16 or 17 to get into the minds of those fine young men and women who, quite honestly, at that age, really are clueless about how the big world really works and what opportunities could be good, bad, or indifferent for them after high school. I believe we're missing a great opportunity here to focus our resources, and where we can help, especially under Chairman Banks' leadership. This subcommittee has, for the past year, tried to work with the Department of Defense and all the services to see what we can do to help you get the job done. And not only get the numbers up, but get the, yes, it is about the number, but if you assess the wrong people, they're not going to make it through MEPS, they're not going to make it through basic training, they're not going to go on. So it is about lighting the fire inside those hearts and minds of those young people so that they will say, I think I'd like to talk to the recruiter again. I believe we are missing an opportunity here to work together, and time wasted is time lost. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Good morning, and many thanks to our panelists for all of your work, for the time that you've taken to assess how to best meet the challenge that we face today, and for articulating just how complex and multifaceted this issue really is. I want to associate myself with the comments that my colleague, Ms. Houlihan, made. This is my third term in Congress, and I have been privileged to serve on the House Armed Services Committee for each one of those terms, and I've served on this subcommittee from the beginning of my tenure in Congress. I long for the days that we really collaborated and worked together on addressing the real issues that are facing the United States military and our active duty service members. But as Ms. Houlihan stated, instead, this seems to have become a vehicle for promoting Breitbart news and agendas around politics. It really is no wonder that so many people think that Congress can't get anything done. For the last year, we've not been addressing real issues. In fact, that may be why the chairman had to create a separate quality of life panel so that we could try to get our work done through that vehicle. I will say, Ms. Schaefer, thank you for the time that you've spent talking to me. I am so privileged to represent Fort Bliss and am in frequent communication with our Army leadership and with active duty service members, and we've had great conversations around how to address this challenge that we face. It is no doubt a real challenge. But I think a couple things that I want to remind us of. Number one, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I've had an opportunity to travel abroad. And as I've talked to our friends and allies around the world, they too are facing recruitment challenges. This is not an America-only issue. And frankly, the more time we waste on the bizarre focus that we've seen this Congress, the less time we have to truly think through real answers. Ms. Schaefer, you and I, just so that I can articulate this publicly, you and I had conversations about how to really connect with younger people. What I hear in my district, especially when it comes time for my conversations with high schools and younger people, they frequently tell me, I wish I had known about the military sooner. And I know there are limitations around recruitment and age, but there are really creative ways that I have seen employed by military leadership in my community, ways to really connect with grade schools, with younger students, so that they get a glimpse of what their future could look like and the options that do exist. Because unless they are familiar, and many of you talked about familiarity as an issue, unless you are familiar, unless you have a relative, unless you have friends, unless you are exposed to the opportunities around military service, frequently it's not a consideration. And I look forward to those continued conversations. I don't have a question. This is the third time we do this so that we can talk about wokeness in the military. We will continue to have our one-on-one conversations and through the quality of life panel so that we truly can be successful in this arena. Thank you all for all of your work and service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Often folks from Guam are recognized for their unusually high rates of military service. And young people continue to enlist, and a large portion of my constituents are also veterans. And I myself am a product of the University of Guam Army ROTC program, which really helped me out, by the way. So despite we have some great enthusiasm for enlistment, for our services, there are opportunity shortfalls that we experience from our prospective recruits in Guam. For example, historically, Guam was only able to submit 4 nominees for our service academies, compared to 5 nominees in other jurisdictions are entitled to. So I had a bill out there, it's called the Guam Service Academy Equality Act, which I'm very happy and pleased that it was incorporated into the NDAA as a fix. So this issue gives bright young students from Guam a fair opportunity to serve in the military, which I continue to advocate for. There's other opportunities out there, especially regarding for military services, especially regarding the Army's Future Soldier Preparatory Course. So Secretary Schaefer, you mentioned briefly about it, and I just want to hear you expand upon this as well for the Future Soldier Preparatory Course, how it helps the Army recruit new soldiers, and my biggest question is the opportunity available for students at Guam.
Thank you for that question, sir. So we instituted the Future Soldier Prep course as a way to sort of open the aperture. We realized that there were eligibility issues, and we wanted to help more folks meet our standards. And so there's a physical piece as well as an academic piece. And we have seen it's been very successful so far. We've had about 10,000 participants so far. There's been a 95% graduation rate. And we have seen both body fat composition decrease so they can make our physical standards, as well as ADS-VAB scores increase. So this was originally a pilot. It was only offered at Fort Jackson, and earlier this year we expanded it to Fort Benning. So those are the only 2 places right now where it's available, but it's available to anyone who's eligible.
I think it's very helpful, especially for those that want to increase their testing results and look at other things they could qualify for, and especially moving it up through the senior ranks, but more importantly, get them into the officer corps as well and with the academy. So we want to recruit, as we heard here, to recruit the best and the brightest, and want to advocate for these opportunities that are available so we can strengthen our forces. So I thank you all for being here today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In reviewing the testimony today, it was not immediately obvious to me that the department and the services are uniformly recruiting in a way for the service members that we need for the battlefields that we expect in the future. The perception of military service and what it means to be a service member seems to be based on what was, very different from what it means to serve today, and especially going forward into the future. That includes service members that not only reflect the diversity of our country, but also the interests and the skill sets that will allow us to fight more effectively across all domains, including intelligence, space, and cyber. I'm also worried that given the past and current challenges in meeting our recruitment goals, coupled with attrition, that we are facing a growing gap in our ranks, and that will overall impact our readiness posture, especially as we enter critical periods of intense strategic competition and potential campaigns amongst multiple theaters. To the entire panel today, would you please elaborate on how your department is thinking about recruitment in the long term, especially to ensure that we are going to be bringing on the type of recruits that can meet the challenges we will face in the future? And are we seeking to fill the gaps through potentially untraditional recruiting methods or recruits? You mentioned a few, but for example, older recruits, college graduates, working Americans looking to upskill or reskill. So you can elaborate on that, please.
Representative Takuda, if I may start. As we look at building for our national defense, we recognize that people are really at the core. They're the foundation of our national defense, and we continue to look for the best and the brightest. And so the way that we are continuing to expand that is thinking about, one, how do we appeal to those young people who have these varied interests, to continue to have programs that develop the workforce. So we have programs that are developing STEM, for example, Starbase, programs which help to develop the STEM field and grow that part of the workforce. We also look to create greater levels of thought diversity, geographic diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, so that we can draw from the best and brightest of America. And so in doing that, we've expanded our outreach and the work that we do through our marketing programs to connect with young people with authenticity in a transparent manner. That requires multi-channel marketing. It requires a level of frequency that will break through the noise that many of these young people, and we heard from a number of the committee members that there's a lot of how young people gather their information, all of that noise. So we have to break through that. And by doing that, we have to spell out the value proposition of how young people can start a profession in the military. The military is a great opportunity to either start a career, carry out a career, or launch a career, because many people develop through the military, whether it's getting technical skills or leadership skills. So that's one of the things that we're doing from an OSD perspective, and that feeds into the way the services engage with young people as well. And I'll defer to my colleagues to talk specifically about what each military service is doing.
Thank you so much for that question. So when I started at RAND 16 years ago, I started out as a strategist, and I bring that, I'm at my core a strategist. So I'm thinking about the long game on this. And right now I am building the Army of 2030 and 2040. And so I am thinking about the skill sets that we need as we pivot to multi-domain operations, and how do we effectively maintain our readiness as we do that. So we are opening one of the things in our transformation is that we are opening the aperture on our prospect market, because we realize that we need higher level skill sets for cyber and these kinds of things. We have a cyber JROTC pilot in which we are trying to help citizenship and also expose folks to the opportunities in the Army for things. So these are the kinds of things we're doing.
Thank you. And I appreciate, I'm sure I'll get the responses from the others perhaps later at another time, but in the interest of times, I completely agree with you, Ms. Schaefer. We are looking for higher level skill sets. So I do think we need to expand our market, not just to high school students, which I think is important, and college students, but also those that have perhaps left higher education, are now in the workforce, because those are valued skill sets and individuals that could really start to fill the gaps that we are seeing now. I did want to touch upon one more thing. In the testimony, it was noted that 33% were disinterested in military service due to the possibility of sexual harassment and assault. 1 in 3. Discrimination, we look back at old records, 2017, 31% of Black service members, 25% of Asian service members said that they had been harassed or assaulted during their service time. This is something we can control. We can't control whether they think they're getting paid enough or they're worried about physical or mental harm. But not being assaulted, discriminated, sexually abused, that is something within our purview. So I would like to know exactly what we are doing to eliminate this as one of the deterrents we are facing to recruiting people into our military service. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for again, digging into this important topic. And I think we've heard some statistics, some grumbling on the other side of the aisle that, we're having another wokeness hearing. I just want to restate again that when cadets, military families, active duty members stop bringing us these issues, then we'll stop talking about it. But as long as they are, we have a duty to address these issues. So I want to just talk about data and what data you have or don't have. Because what I'm looking at, just along those lines that I just discussed, is nearly 7 in 10 active service members have witnessed politicization in the military. We have another poll from Heritage that 68% have witnessed significant or somewhat political activity in the military. We have 63% of active duty members say they would not recommend their child to join. That's a double hit. That could be a retention issue and a recruiting issue. We have a report on the National Independent Panel of Military Service and Readiness. We have the Reagan Institute, where the Secretary of Defense and Chairman just spoke. Perceived politicization drives declining confidence in the military. The top response is military leadership becoming overly politicized, with 62%. This includes 60% of registered Democrats, 60% of independents, 65% of Republicans, saying that this leadership is over-politicizing what should be an apolitical body. That's an issue, and we have to address that issue. So I asked last year all of the vices, many of them now are the chiefs, and all of the senior enlisted advisors, if they had any data, polling, focus groups for recruits and why they're not joining, and what's going on. We have a lot of narratives that you've all espoused, COVID, declining bodies or what have you, but does anyone disagree with the vice chiefs that you don't have regular polling and regular focus groups?
Representative Waltz, we do regular polling. Through our jammers, we look at and we engage with young people to understand what drives propensity and why they would not serve. For example, for reasons why they serve, they join for pay and for money and for education and for the benefits and for travel and for health benefits, all of those positive things. But the reasons why they choose not to serve is fear.
That's polling people that join. I'm looking at a recruit that may have signed up, may have clicked, may have talked, and then didn't.
Representative, we're actually looking at the community of people who are that we're going out to recruit and trying to understand what drives them as well. And so why are reasons not to join? Fear of injury and death, the risk of post-traumatic stress.
What date is this poll? Because all your vice chiefs, now chiefs, said we don't do it. And now I've got think tanks that are doing it.
So Chairman, Representative Waltz, I'd be happy to come and brief you on this research. It's research that we do annually and continuously in geographic markets. But
why is the military leadership unaware of it? Why can't they speak to it, including the senior enlisted advisors?
Representative, I will take that on. That should be my responsibility.
Okay, so let me ask you this, just in the little bit of time I have remaining. I don't mean to cut you off. Why do we have, with the Army in a recruiting crisis, 50-year low, what data drove the calling, which was a cartoon of a young lady with two moms that basically, said, and then she joined. Is there a body of LGBTQ or of service members with LGBTQ parents that we were targeting? And if so, what was that target audience and how many then joined? Ms. Schaefer.
Sir, this predated me. I'm familiar with the commercial, but I don't know the genesis of it or why they.
Wasn't that the main recruiting effort for the Army for at least a year? Because it's now shifted.
The calling was before me.
Congressman, if I could jump in on this.
Sure.
2 years, 2022 and 2021 of Gallup polling nationally shows that 20% of young Americans under 25 consider themselves part of the LGBTQ community. That's exactly the market that we're looking to recruit
Do you
from.
collect then, Air Force or Army, do you know how much of the Air Force or how much of the Army identifies as LGBTQ? What percentage?
I'll take that for the record.
So you don't know?
I don't know offhand, but...
you knew the Gallup poll, but you don't know within your service? Do you collect that data?
I don't believe that we actually ask
I don't think you do.
minors within
Was
our
there a
service.
body within the military that then, that you wanted to be sure felt comfortable? Because this was the main effort from the Army, and they're 45,000 short.
Congressman, our recruiting is trying to reach the broadest swath of the American people possible. When large percentages identify, we want them to see
Mr. Wagner, it's not working. It's not working, and now the Army has had a wholesale shift back to jumping out of planes and kicking indoors, which I would argue historically is what soldiers want to do. So I'm trying to get at what data is driving this shift. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing before the committee. I want to bring this back to what I think the issue is at hand, which is to support our service members, their families, and to recruit qualified and capable individuals to help protect our national interest and our defense. I'm proud to represent a district that includes Nellis Air Force Base, Creech Air Force Base, the Hawthorne Army Depot, and I've met with service members, and I know just how honored they are to serve our nation. What I want to see happen is that they feel proud of their service, that they spread the word, and that they continue to add to your recruitment and retention efforts. And so I appreciate, first of all that you are doing, not only in recognizing the shortfalls that we're facing, but some of the actionable solutions that we hope to discuss today. So for the panel, can each of you tell me what your number one recruitment issue is? Very briefly.
Representative Horsford, the number one recruiting challenge is that there's a disconnection with the military. There's a lack of familiarity. Young people who are qualified to serve just don't know what the options are in the military, and so we need to do a better job collectively, not just the department, not just the services, but collectively all of government, leaders in the community.
So lack of awareness.
Lack of awareness.
The same with us, and in our case, it's historical. We had a lot of our installations in the northern part of the country bracked in the 80s. And so we have huge swaths of the country where there is no Army presence and folks don't see people in uniform walking down the street. They can't ask them questions about what it's really like.
Lack of familiarity, awareness and familiarity, okay?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and the answer is the same for the Department of the Navy as well, that lack of awareness, that lack of familiarity. And that's part of the reason a lot of this outreach is so important, because that enables us to help educate the public on the value of military service and what it can offer them. Thank you.
Congressman, I'll associate myself with my colleagues' remarks. Lack of familiarity is the most important thing, but what's important to realize is that once people become familiar, they want to join. They understand the benefits of service. They understand the opportunities, whether they be educational, financial. They understand the community, that being part of a team, but also being part of a bigger team, a team of teams, as I mentioned in my opening statement, and why that matters. And the data proves it. We've got historically high retention.
Thank you. I have a limited amount of time. Honorable Wagner, I did want to follow up to your opening statement where you discussed a variety of improvements. How will the recruitment strategy for the Air Force evolve over the years to attract candidates to meet those goals?
Congressman, what we want to do is we want to optimize what we've done, but we can't take our eye off the ball. What we know is that Gen Z gets their information from very different sources than we do. So what are we doing about it? We're trying to meet them where they are. We're right now leveraged across a whole swath of streaming video channels, Netflix, Hulu, HBO Now, Paramount Plus. First. Second, we're also working to advertise in streaming music, whether it be SoundCloud or Spotify. Third, we're even looking at interactive gaming, Activision Blizzard. We're looking at Twitch and other platforms where young people are spending the majority of their time. And finally, we're leveraging influencers that young people want to be like, want to mimic, and tune into, whether it be on YouTube or other places.
Thank you. Dr. Schaefer, in today's testimony, you discussed your service's new recruitment strategy by identifying shortfalls. I especially support the idea of having a specialized recruitment arm to focus on that priority. Can you discuss any special programs or incentives that are in place or will be in place to attract recruits with unique skill sets like STEM or language proficiency?
Thank you for that question, sir. We've already put some in place. We have given a bonus for those who want to raise their hand and volunteer to join this new recruiting force. And I think we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that we are establishing a new workforce and a new pipeline and a path to leadership with this, and that, I think, in itself is going to be an incentive.
Thank you. I just had my interview session for our military academy recruits over the past weekend, and this is what we talked about: exposure, awareness, connecting them to people who represent those services. I'm proud of those who seek these opportunities, and I think we should spend more time trying to break down those barriers rather than creating more cultural wars that divide us. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we talk about the various reasons for our recruitment shortages, and we continue to list COVID as one of those key examples, even though the DoD Inspector General has released a report saying that COVID can no longer be utilized as a reasoning for the recruitment shortage. So I want to make everyone to be a little bit more mindful in your statements when you're actually continuing to utilize this, unless you disagree with the Department of Defense Inspector General's report. You know, I'm looking at where we're at, and I think that it's unavoidable when I'm talking to many service members who are currently in the military and those who are leaving that have expressed concerns over the military's use of DEI initiatives. Do you think these service members in the 9,000 who were, in my opinion, unconstitutionally purged out for refusing the COVID vaccine would speak positively and help with recruitment efforts whenever they feel that this is actually an issue for them?
Representative Mills, first of all, I just want to focus on the service members that we have in today. The value proposition that we offer them today seems to be sticking because we don't have a retention issue. With respect to service members who were discharged for refusal of COVID vaccine, I wouldn't want to speculate on what they would say. I'm sure that if for as many people that were discharged, they would have as many different perspectives on what their view of their military service was.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, look, it's not as if that's the only thing that is hinging upon, but I just find it a bit odd that we continue to utilize this in our opening statements. And to some of my colleagues' points, we brought this up 3 different times. We keep utilizing it as an excuse for recruitment efforts to go down, and I don't think that's actually going to be accurate.
Congressman, if
I also want to, if I can just continue on, and by the way, I want to thank you for your service in the military. I know you wore the uniform as well. Just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, how many of you actually had served in uniform? One person. You know, you talk about the significant importance you give, especially you, Mr. Wagner, the rah-rah speech of how great serving in the military is, yet you've never actually served yourself, so don't actually know how far we've fallen from where we actually used to be, where we prioritize things like increased lethality, readiness, and being properly equipped, and instead now focus on the diversity, equity, and inclusion of our military. You know, we talk about the fact that we have a great retention, but we also don't talk about the fact that we've actually lowered standards. And that doesn't actually make us for a fighting and stronger force. When you talk about push-up and 2-mile standards, that's been lowered. When we talk about the Navy, who's lowered their entrance exam requirements on their AQFT test, now offering various waivers. But what I would say is, and I agree with one of the key points that you talk about, we have to increase and support a better quality of life for our service members. We have to ensure that the pay is in line to make sure that they can't make more serving as a waiter somewhere or a waitress somewhere, and that they actually have a good quality of life, not just for themselves, but for their spouse and their families. And I think that's a very key issue, which is all the more reasons why when we submitted all of our requirements under the NDAA, I was shocked whenever the Senate came back, who's democratically run, with only a 5.2% increase in our E1 to E6, knowing that under Bidenomics, we have, just sitting on the military bases alone, a 20+% increase in inflation on our quality of life for basic goods. And so I will say that I do agree with you in the fact that we need to do more with increasing the rate of pay to increase quality of life, but also the allocation of MILCON that would enable our bases to have better affordability and a better availability of housing, but also not having our barracks and our actual buildings who are falling in on soldiers, especially in areas in Indo-PACOM that has a level 5 corrosion level that we see has been completely ignored for quite some time. Speaking of the military benefits and things, do you believe that our military benefits, and just going into what I talked about lowering standards, do you think that they benefit by taking the approach of lowering standards rather than addressing issues head on?
Congressman, I just want to make sure I understand. Is your question about the benefits, or is it?
No. I'm just saying, do you think that they benefit from the lowering of standards? That's the question itself.
Congressman, I would comment and then defer to my colleagues as well, but I don't believe that we're lowering standards. I think that
But I actually have examples where we are, in fact, lowering standards, both on the push-up and the 2-mile standards, the AQFT test standards, where we're actually offering more waivers. So I don't know that you can say that we're not lowering physical fitness standards when, in fact, that's exactly what we're proven to have done.
Congressman, just a few weeks ago, I took the Army Combat Fitness Test. It is a very good test of fitness. It tests a range of capabilities and strengths that align with the war fighting that's required. So, sir, I'm not sure that we see that change in the fitness standards the same way.
Well, I would argue that whenever you're actually proven to have lowered the push-up and 2-mile standards, adding additional minute on the 2-mile standard, lowering push-ups by 1, for example, for females in the military. But I would also just offer one thing, which is that we talk about our actual inability to try and be ready for things, but when you're having drag shows and prioritizing DEI, and you're thinking about all these types of things, and you're ridiculing people for TP action rallies and saying it's apolitical, that probably has a big recruitment deficit as well on the way that we actually view our military. With that, I yield back.
Ms. Strickland.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. I serve on the Bipartisan Quality of Life panel, and I appreciate my colleague raising issues around housing, pay, and also childcare and spouse employment. All those things contribute to the household income of those who serve. And I know we want to collect quantitative information, but qualitative information and word of mouth is one of the strongest recruiting tools as well. I want to talk a bit about how you are handling the HR function with recruiting. I know that there is an attempt to professionalize it because a lot of people who are recruiters aren't necessarily professional HR people. And I think given where we are in this century and the diverse pool of candidates from which we must pull if we're going to have a strong military is very important. So I'm going to start with you, Ms. Schaefer. Can you talk a bit about how the Army is professionalizing the HR function and how you think that will better address the recruiting needs we have?
So we talked about this a lot as we were going through the transformation process. And HR really has become so technical at this point. And we have, a lot of MOSs, over 100. And so we talked about, is it better to have a generalist go out or a specialist? And ultimately, we looked again at industry standards, and they have a professional recruiting force. And rather than just sending out an email to somebody saying you're going to be a recruiter, we wanted to develop a talent pipeline for that specifically.
Great, well, thank you. And then I would like to ask each of you, could you tell me the one thing that you are doing right now to improve recruiting? We'll start with you.
Thank you for that question. There are a range of things, and as we talked about, this is a complex problem, so there's not a single silver bullet.
Right.
I'd say the one thing that is critical to what we're doing is this national call to service. We do need to increase awareness of the opportunities and options for young people in the military. We do need for people to understand all of the benefits of service and the value of service, whether that's for a one-term enlistment or for a full career 30-plus years. That's an area that we have a great opportunity to help raise that level of awareness. If we can drive that awareness, if we can change perceptions, and then get some consideration, the recruiters, the professional recruiters and the recruiters that are out there in the field then have an opportunity to then grow into the detail of what particular MOS, what opportunities are there for you. But this is an area that we need help from Congress, from our sister agencies, the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, from leaders at the state and local level to talk about, and in corporations. There are a number of employee resource groups that are veterans, and to get veterans out there in the community and talk about how did military service change their lives. It changed my life.
Yep.
It gave me an opportunity to serve in a different way. It helped me to learn how to address problems in a much more structured manner. It helped me to build a career in taking advantage of all those skills and then bring all of that back to serving military families. And that's an area that I think we need to do more.
Yeah, I talk about the friends that I went to high school with who joined the military right after high school, served 20 years, and now they have another career, and they're doing very well financially with secure retirement. Ms. Schaefer? And I've got about a minute and a half left, so if you...
So I will just say it's this enormous transformation effort. We really wanted to look at ourselves, see what we needed to change, and move forward on changing it. This is one of the biggest transformations in the Army, at least over my 20-plus year career. And I'm incredibly proud of the systematic way we went about this.
Great. Mr. Parker?
I'd say it's various efforts to improve our eligible pool, our eligible population of folks to serve. One of the things that we started up this year was a future sailor prep course, really modeled on the Army's model, and that's something that's been very helpful and successful to us. And so really looking at various ways to expand that eligible population, and then further, Mr. Vazirani's point, really kind of reaching out, expanding that outreach as well. That's another way really to expand it, by recruiting in every zip code, and also finding other ways to reach our people and tell authentic stories of what it means to be a sailor or a Marine.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner?
Congresswoman, I think it's a two-pronged approach. First, we've got to be everywhere in this diverse country, including places as far away as Guam and American Samoa, to tell stories with targeted industry best practices to get out there and to be available and accessible. But we've also got to look under the hood. As I talked about in my opening statement, we took a look at things where we were not optimized, and I'll just give you one really quick example. Our body composition standards in the Air Force were different than OSD standards, and so we aligned them to meet what OSD allowed. Then we tracked those recruits who came in under the different standard, 1,400 of them. Of those 1,400 that would have otherwise been excluded, only one failed to pass their physical fitness test at BMT. So this is a success story, but what we've got to do is look externally to what we can do to reach the broadest proportion of our population, and internally where we can update things that we haven't taken a look at in quite some time.
Great. Well, thank you for your comments, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to echo our witnesses' statements that addressing our military recruitment challenges will take a whole-of-government approach, and we all play a critical role in that. I firmly believe that military service is an unmatched opportunity for leadership skills, for personal growth, and a sense of accomplishment. And I take pride in the responsibility of nominating students from my district each year to the military academies and hosting an annual job fair where I encourage all the services to attend and set up tables to inform and to provide outreach. As a representative of Alabama's Civil Rights District, I know that we must address today's challenges through a lens of diversity and inclusion, because we want to make sure that our military reflects the beautiful tapestry of this nation. Mr. Wagner, I couldn't agree more with your testimony where you state, quote, if we do not intentionally invest in growing proximity among young men and young women and the nation's fastest growing racial and ethnic groups, we risk the future of the all-volunteer force. Diversity and inclusion is not a woke game. It is a mission critical to our national security. The polarization and attacks on diversity and inclusion from across the aisle, all while 41% of our military is part of a minority group, hurts our military recruitment efforts and is a distraction from the actual issues at hand. To the Honorable Deputy Undersecretary, do you believe that diversity is America's strength, and can you share the readiness benefits of having a diverse military force?
Representative Sewell, thank you very much. I do believe the strength of America comes from our diversity. And that I firmly believe that. I think I'm an example of that, and I think my colleagues are an example of that. We are committed to cultivating a force that recognizes and embraces and leverages the strengths of these different people and different perspectives. We also know that by embracing that diversity, we will bring in talent from the breadth of America. What that requires is that we then need to focus on equity and inclusion, which will then enable those service members to perform at their best and that will improve our warfighting capability. We have seen, and there are studies out there that say that the lack of diversity actually degrades battlefield performance. And so it's critical that we have a breadth of talent and a breadth of capability, and that we integrate that talent, and that those people who serve feel that sense of belonging to that greater purpose and that mission. So, ma'am, I firmly believe that the diversity is our strength.
Thank you, sir. To you, Mr. Wagner, I think that if communities of color saw more diversity within our leadership positions in the military, then they would be more likely to serve. What steps is the Air Force taking to recruit diverse candidates into the officer position? And how are you utilizing our ROTC programs, especially those at HBCUs, to create a pipeline of diverse candidates who can rise through the ranks?
Congresswoman, what we know is you can't be it if you can't see it. And so last year, we took steps to update a 2014 document which went to how are we putting our resources to recruit officers into our force. We were looking at expanding the applicant pool of people who were interested in applying, whether it to be the Service Academy or through ROTC, which is a non-traditional way of applying. As you know, it requires the nomination of members of Congress, et cetera. This resource drill designed to appeal and enhance and increase familiarity will help us target communities that have often been ignored. And so we are focused on expanding the pool of qualified applicants. Let me be absolutely clear. Merit is the sole qualification for admission to the U.S. Air Force Academy. It's the sole qualification for an ROTC scholarship. But if we don't intentionally set aspirational goals to try to recruit a diverse officer corps, we're never going to start that pipeline so one day someone can get through the system and become the first Black chief of staff of any military department and military service like General Brown was before he was confirmed as chairman. We're never going to have a Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force like Joanne Bass. We've got to start early. We've got to have people see that you can be it. And then we have to take proactive steps to get our message out, and not only a message, but fund that message with resources consistently.
Amen. I yield back the balance of my time.
I want to thank all of our witnesses and committee members for participating today. This is a very important hearing, a very important topic. We all agree, a 50-year, on the 50th anniversary of an all-volunteer force, a recruitment crisis that we've never seen before. Some of my colleagues complained. A third committee hearing talking about the same subject. Well, I guarantee you next year we're going to dive into this subject even more than we already have, because it is just that important that we solve it. And what we're doing right now is failing, as we've talked about before. And as I said before, the all-volunteer force is at a crossroads. If we continue down the same path of valuing radical ideologies like DEI over national security, the recruits will continue to dwindle. These are the real issues. One of my colleagues, I think Ms. Houlihan, said the focus is bizarre to talk about it. But in fact, accusing our veterans and new recruits' real concerns as bizarre is offensive. And it's offensive to anyone that wants to address these recruitment issues. With wars in the Middle East and Europe and China seeking a stranglehold on the Pacific, America's national security is in real danger. And we don't have the luxury to keep failing at communicating a message that resonates with Americans who want to serve our country. And that's what this is all about. So thank you very much for your time, the important service that you provide to our country. The committee is adjourned.